Tonight, you finally became family. Madame Kang looked at Yejide and said those words quietly. Besties, if that line already gave you feelings, don't go anywhere, because what happens in this hospital room might change the whole Kang family forever. The words settled into the hospital room like something fragile, like glass placed on a surface that had not been steady for a very long time. For a moment, no one spoke. Yejide held the newborn closer to her chest, studying the older woman's face as if trying to decide whether she had heard correctly. Because the last time those two women had faced each other across a room, Madame Kang had said something very different. You are not family. That sentence had been delivered at a dinner table in front of 17 people, in front of Sunwoo, in front of Duri, in front of everyone who mattered and everyone who didn't. And it had landed the way a sentence like that always lands when a powerful woman says it, not just as an insult, as a verdict. Yejide exhaled slowly now. That's a very big change in 24 hours, she said. Sunwoo stepped closer to the bed. He had been standing near the window, watching his mother the way he always watched people when he wasn't sure yet what they were going to do next. It didn't take 24 hours, he said calmly. It took a lifetime. Madame Kang didn't deny it. Her eyes moved briefly to the sleeping baby in Yejide's arms, then to Duri, who was sitting on the couch near the foot of the bed with a purple crayon in her hand. The little girl had stopped drawing. She was watching the adults with the kind of focused attention that children develop when they understand that important things are being decided but no one is explaining them properly. Children always knew when adults were speaking about things that mattered. They couldn't always name what was happening, but they felt it. Every word, every silence, every shift in the air. Finally, Yejide said the thing everyone in the room was thinking, but no one else had said yet. Days ago at dinner, you said my children didn't belong in your family. Her voice wasn't angry. It was steady, honest. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. Sunwoo's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. He had already said his piece the night before. He had stood beside his wife in front of everyone at that table. He had looked his mother in the eyes and told her clearly that if Yejide wasn't family, then neither was he. And for Kang Sunwoo, that sentence had never been a threat. It had been a promise. One he had made to himself long before he made it out loud. Madame Kang looked at him now, then back at Yejide. Yes, she said simply. I did say that. Duri frowned immediately. That wasn't nice. The adults almost smiled. Almost. Because the room was still too heavy for smiles to fully land. Madame Kang nodded once. No, she said. It wasn't. The room fell quiet again. Then she added something that changed the air completely. But it was necessary. Yejide raised an eyebrow. That's a dangerous word. Madame Kang folded her hands calmly in front of her. I needed to see something. Sunwoo already knew where this was going. Whether she would leave, he said quietly. His voice carried no surprise, only the weight of someone confirming something they had already suspected. Madame Kang looked at him. Yes. Yejide blinked. You pushed me like that. Just to see if I would walk away? Madame Kang's voice was steady. The Kang family has survived for generations because the people inside it do not run when things become difficult. She said it simply, not cruelly, not as a defense, as a fact she had carried for decades. Yejide tilted her head slightly. And what if I had left? Madame Kang didn't hesitate. Then you would have proven that you were never meant to survive in this family. Sunwoo shook his head. Mother. But Yejide surprised him. She didn't look offended. She looked thoughtful. The kind of thoughtful that meant she was already working through the logic rather than fighting the emotion. So the dinner, she said slowly. You humiliating me in front of everyone. Madame Kang nodded. A test. Yejide looked down at the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she looked back up. Well, she said quietly, I guess I passed. For the first time that night, the corner of Madame Kang's mouth moved slightly. Yes. Then her expression changed. Not emotionally, strategically. The warmth, thin as it had been, retreated behind something colder and more purposeful. And when she spoke again, her voice carried a very different weight. Unfortunately, she said, the real test is about to begin. Sunwoo's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Madame Kang turned toward the hospital window. The city lights flickered across the glass like scattered stars. Seoul at night was never fully dark. Too many buildings. Too many lives continuing without pause. The Shin family, she said quietly, already knows this child was born. The room went completely still. Yejide's grip tightened around the baby instinctively. Not from panic. From the deep, biological certainty of a mother who has just been told that someone outside this room knows her child's name. Duri looked from one adult to another with careful eyes. Why is everyone being quiet? Sunwoo didn't answer her. His eyes had moved to the security monitor mounted on the wall near the door. The small screen showed a live feed of the hospital entrance outside. Rain had begun to fall since they last looked. It came down in quiet sheets against the pavement, turning the streetlights into soft, blurred columns of gold. And parked directly under one of those lights was a black car. Its engine running. Headlights off. Patient. Sunwoo's voice dropped. They didn't just find out. Madame Kang slowly followed his gaze toward the monitor. No, she said. They came. The rain fell harder outside the hospital windows, turning the streetlights into blurred halos of gold. For a long moment, no one in the room spoke. Sunwoo continued watching the monitor. The black car outside had not moved. The engine was still running. The headlights were still off. Waiting. There was something about that kind of stillness that was more threatening than movement. A car that moved might just be passing through. A car that waited had a reason. Madame Kang stepped closer to the screen, her expression calm but sharp. That car arrived 20 minutes ago, she said quietly. Sunwoo glanced at her. You've been watching it? I've been watching everything. She said it without pride, as if watching everything was simply what she did. The way some people breathed. Yejide shifted slightly in the hospital bed. Would someone please explain why a parked car is suddenly making everyone act like the world is ending? Sunwoo turned toward her. It might be nothing, he said. His voice was careful, controlled. The voice of a man managing information before distributing it. Madame Kang shook her head. No, she said. It isn't. Duri slid off the couch and padded quietly toward the adults on small feet. She looked up at the security monitor with wide, serious eyes. Are those bad people? Sunwoo crouched beside her immediately. We don't know yet. The little girl studied the monitor with an expression of deep concentration, her eyebrows pulled together. Her crayon was still in her hand. Then she said something that made the room feel heavier. But Grandma said they're coming. Madame Kang didn't correct her. Instead, she folded her arms and kept watching the car on the screen. Sunwoo, she said quietly. Zoom the camera. Sunwoo reached up and tapped the monitor controls. The image tightened. The windshield of the black car filled more of the screen. Dark. Reflective. Impossible to see through from this angle. But something moved inside, a shadow shifting behind the glass. Sunwoo leaned forward slightly. Someone's in the passenger seat. Yejide's voice dropped. So they're not even hiding. No, Madame Kang said calmly. They're announcing themselves. Sunwoo straightened slowly. That means they want something. Madame Kang nodded. They always did. Yejide frowned. I thought this Shin family hated you. They do, Madame Kang said. Then why show up at a hospital? Madame Kang's gaze dropped to the baby sleeping in Yejide's arms. She studied him for a moment before answering. Because hospitals contain things people love. The silence that followed was thick. Then Sunwoo's phone buzzed in his hand. He checked the screen. Message from his security chief. He read it once. Slowly. Then again. Yejide watched his face carefully. What is it? Sunwoo lifted the phone and turned it slightly so Madame Kang could see the screen. Security says someone from that car is asking to come inside. Duri's eyes went wide. They want to see the baby? Sunwoo almost laughed despite everything. Something like that. Madame Kang's eyes narrowed slightly. Did they give a name? Sunwoo looked back at the phone. Yes. He turned the screen toward them. The name appeared in the security message as a formal request. 2 words. Shinji. Yejide read it slowly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the name fully landed. She looked at Sunwoo. The woman you were supposed to marry? Sunwoo nodded once. Yes. Duri looked between them with an expression of scandalized disbelief. You were going to marry someone else? Sunwoo rubbed the back of his neck. That was a long time ago. Madame, Kang gave a small, humorless smile. Not long enough. Sunwoo glanced back at the monitor. The passenger door of the black car was opening. A woman stepped out into the rain. Tall. Elegant. Moving with the kind of confidence that didn't need to announce itself. She held a black umbrella above her head as she stepped onto the pavement, and she stood beneath the streetlight for a moment with complete composure, looking directly toward the hospital entrance. Even through the security camera, her certainty was obvious. Yejide studied the screen carefully. That's her? Yes, Madame Kang said. Yejide raised an eyebrow. She looks very comfortable for someone showing up uninvited. Madame Kang nodded slightly. Because she believes she's welcome. Sunwoo exhaled once through his nose. Well, he said quietly, we should correct that misunderstanding. He gently placed his hand on Yejide's shoulder for a moment. I'm going downstairs. Yejide looked up at him. Sunwoo. He paused. Be careful. Sunwoo smiled faintly. Something in his expression was softer than the rest of him. Always. Duri tugged firmly on his sleeve before he could take another step. Dad. He crouched down immediately to her height. Yes? Duri looked very serious. If she tries to be mean, she raised her tiny fist. Punch her. For the first time since the tension began to build, Sunwoo laughed. Genuinely. I'll try diplomacy first. Madame Kang spoke before he could stand and leave. Sunwoo. He turned. Her expression was serious in a different way now. Not sharp. Careful. Do not underestimate her. I never do. She isn't here for a conversation. Sunwoo held his mother's gaze. I know. He looked back once more at Yejide and the baby. Something crossed his face that he didn't try to hide. Then he turned toward the door. Which means it's time we find out exactly why she came. Outside, the rain continued falling. Shinji stood beneath her umbrella, waiting, watching the hospital entrance with the patience of someone who had prepared for exactly this moment. But tonight, the Kang family intended to change the ending she had written. The hospital lobby was almost empty at this hour. Only the soft hum of the overhead lights and the distant sound of rain tapping against the tall glass doors filled the space. A cleaner moved slowly near the far wall. The reception desk had a single nurse looking down at paperwork. Normal. Quiet. Sunwoo stepped out of the elevator with calm, deliberate steps. Anyone watching him would think he was simply a tired new father going downstairs for air. But the security guard stationed near the front desk straightened immediately when he saw him. Mr. Kang. Sunwoo nodded once. Is she still outside? Yes, sir. The guard hesitated slightly. She refused to come in. Said she'd wait. Sunwoo glanced through the tall, glass panels of the hospital entrance. Across the glowing stretch of wet pavement, Shinji stood exactly where the security camera had shown her. Still, perfectly composed, the black umbrella held at an even angle above her head. Waiting. Sunwoo adjusted the sleeve of his jacket. Opened the door. The guard obeyed. The moment the doors slid apart, the cool, rain-scented air drifted into the lobby like a breath from outside. Sunwoo stepped through. Shinji looked up the instant he appeared. Their eyes met across the short, wet distance between them. She smiled. Slowly. Like someone greeting an old acquaintance over drinks rather than an enemy outside a hospital at midnight. "Well?" she said lightly as Sunwoo stepped closer. That didn't take long. The rain tapped gently against the canopy of her umbrella as she tilted her head. "I was beginning to think the great Kang Sunwoo had become afraid of hospital parking lots." Sunwoo stopped a few feet away from her. "I'm not afraid of parking lots," he said calmly. "Just bad intentions." Shinji's smile widened. Still charming. And still dramatic. For a moment they simply looked at one another. The past existed between them. Unfinished. Unspoken. The way certain things stay when they're left incomplete rather than properly ended. Then Shinji glanced toward the hospital building. "So," she said with deliberate casualness, "congratulations." Sunwoo didn't react. "On what?" "The baby." Her eyes gleamed faintly. "A boy, right?" The air between them went cold. Sunwoo's voice dropped slightly. "You've been busy." Shinji shrugged. Information travels quickly. Especially when powerful families are involved. Sunwoo studied her carefully. "And what exactly brings the Shin family to a hospital at midnight?" She tapped the handle of her umbrella lightly against the wet pavement. "Oh, nothing too serious. Just curiosity." Sunwoo almost smiled. "That's a strange word for stalking." Shinji laughed softly. "You always were suspicious. Which is why my father liked you." Sunwoo's expression didn't change. "I didn't marry you." "No," she said. "You married someone much more interesting." Her eyes lifted briefly toward the upper floors of the hospital building. "Yejide." Sunwoo stepped half an inch closer. That small movement alone carried enough warning to silence most people. But Shinji didn't move. She simply looked directly at him. "You look tense." "Did someone tell you I might be dangerous?" Sunwoo's answer came quietly. "You told me yourself." Shinji smiled again. "That was years ago. And you were very rude back then." Sunwoo's voice stayed level. "You threatened my wife. And you expected me to be polite?" For the first time, the easy humor in Shinji's expression faded slightly. "I didn't threaten her. Not yet." The rain fell harder. Water splashed against the pavement between them. Sunwoo folded his arms. "Then this is your chance. Say whatever you came here to say." Shinji studied him for a long moment. Her expression turned thoughtful. More serious. "You really don't understand, do you?" "Understand what?" "That this night was always going to happen." Sunwoo didn't respond, so she continued. "My father spent 20 years rebuilding after your family humiliated ours." Her voice stayed calm, almost conversational, as if she were discussing something ordinary rather than a war that had been waiting patiently in the background of both their lives. "And tonight you welcomed a new heir into the Kang family." She looked toward the hospital again, "which makes things very interesting." Sunwoo's eyes hardened. "Careful." Shinji raised an eyebrow. "Is that a warning?" "Yes." She smiled slowly. "You used to be better at hiding your temper." Sunwoo shook his head. "No. I just used to care what you thought." For a brief moment, something flickered in her expression, something she hadn't planned to show. But it vanished quickly. She leaned slightly closer. "You should go back upstairs." Sunwoo frowned. Why? Because the longer you stay here talking to me, she tilted her head toward the hospital entrance behind him. The longer your family stays unprotected. Sunwoo didn't move. Are you threatening them? Shinji laughed softly. No. I'm educating you. Sunwoo's voice became quieter and colder at the same time. You came here to make a point. Yes. And you've made it. Shinji took a single step backward toward the waiting car. The driver's door had not opened. The driver was still watching. But tonight wasn't about revenge, she said. Sunwoo watched her carefully. No? No. It was about reminding you of something. And what would that be? Her eyes gleamed. That love makes powerful men predictable. Sunwoo considered that for a moment. Then he replied quietly. Maybe. Shinji tilted her head. Predictable men are easy to destroy. Sunwoo shook his head slowly. No. They're just easier to find. Her smile faltered slightly. Before she could respond, the hospital doors opened again behind Sunwoo. Footsteps. Quiet but certain. Shinji looked up. Genuine surprise crossed her face for the first time. Madame Kang stepped outside. She carried no umbrella. The rain landed on her shoulders immediately, but she didn't seem to notice. Or didn't care. Well, Shinji said softly. The matriarch herself. Madame Kang walked forward until she stood directly beside her son. Her posture was perfect. Her voice was calm. Shinji. She let the name sit alone for a moment. You've grown older. Shinji bowed her head slightly, a gesture that looked like respect but carried none. And you've grown sharper. Madame Kang's eyes were cold. You should leave. Shinji laughed quietly. Or what? Madame Kang didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. Or you will discover that my patience ended 20 years ago. The rain intensified around them. The tension between the two families hung in the wet air like a current before lightning. For a moment, Shinji looked between them. Mother and son, standing together. Something shifted in her expression. Not defeat. Recalculation. She sighed. Fine. She stepped toward the waiting car. But this conversation isn't over. Sunwoo replied immediately. It is tonight. Shinji paused at the car door. Then she turned back one final time. Enjoy tonight. She slid into the car. Tomorrow is mine. The engine roared softly to life. Rain splashed against the tires as the vehicle pulled away. Moments later, the black car disappeared into the wet night like it had never been there. Sunwoo stood in the rain and watched the empty street for several long seconds. Then he turned to his mother. You let her go? Madame Kang nodded. Yes. Why? Because tonight was not her move. Sunwoo frowned. Then whose was it? Madame Kang turned slowly toward the hospital entrance. The real move, she said quietly, is still coming. They walked back inside. The lobby felt warmer. Or perhaps it only seemed that way because the cold had followed them in from outside. The rain was still audible against the glass. Sunwoo pressed the elevator button. Madame Kang stood beside him. For a moment neither of them spoke. Sunwoo finally broke the silence. She left that badge on purpose. He wasn't asking. Madame Kang didn't ask which badge. Yes. To tell us she was already inside. Yes. Before Shinji even showed herself outside. Madame Kang nodded. Shinji's appearance in the parking lot was not the threat. It was the distraction. The badge on that cart was the actual message. Sunwoo's jaw tightened. They're testing how close they can get. Yes. And tonight they got close. Madame Kang's voice was steady. Tonight they learned the answer. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. What happens now? Sunwoo asked. Madame Kang looked straight ahead at the closing doors. We go back to our family. And after that? She met his eyes in the faint reflection of the metal panels. We make sure this never happens again. Sunwoo studied her for a moment. You have a plan? It wasn't a question. Madame Kang allowed herself the smallest smile. I always have a plan. The elevator climbed. Upstairs, the hospital corridor was quiet. Sunwoo pushed open the door to the room. Duri looked up the instant he entered. Did you punch her? Sunwoo laughed. Genuinely. For the second time tonight. No. Then what happened? We talked. Duri considered this with clear skepticism. That doesn't sound exciting. It wasn't supposed to be. Yejide studied his face carefully as he came to the bed. She had learned to read him by now. Not the version of him that others saw. The version that only came through when the guard was down. Is it over? Sunwoo sat on the edge of the bed beside her. For tonight. He looked at the baby. The tiny boy shifted slightly in his blanket. His chest rose and fell with the perfect rhythm of someone completely unaware of everything that had just happened on his behalf. Everything is going to be okay, Sunwoo said softly. Madame Kang entered behind him. She stopped near the door for a moment. The sight in front of her was simple. Sunwoo seated beside the bed, Yejide holding the baby, Duri coloring again. It looked normal. Something the Kang family had rarely experienced. Something Madame Kang had spent decades believing was a luxury rather than a necessity. Duri held up, her drawing without looking up from her work. I'm almost done. Madame Kang walked further into the room. What is it this time? Duri lifted the paper proudly. 6 stick figures. All of them standing in front of a small house with a crooked roofline and a door that didn't quite align with the frame. Mom, Dad, Duri, Baby June, Grandma, and one more. Mrs. Park, everyone, together. Madame Kang moved closer and looked at the drawing carefully. Then she reached toward the baby with both hands. Sunwoo watched. Yejide watched. Madame Kang held the edge of the blanket for a moment. Then the baby's tiny hand opened and closed around her finger. The room went very quiet. Madame Kang didn't pull away. She stood there for a long moment, looking down at the small hand holding hers. Then she spoke softly. For many years I protected the Kang name. She looked at Yejide. Tonight I protected something more important. Yejide held her gaze steadily. We protected it. Together. Madame Kang considered that. Then nodded once. Yes. Sunwoo looked between them. For the first time in a long time, the 2 women in his life were not on opposite sides of anything. He turned toward the window. The Shin family thought love made us weak. He looked at Yejide, at Duri, at his son. Everything he had spent years building walls around. Everything he had been afraid to love too openly because he knew what powerful people did with the things you loved. They were wrong. Duri raised her crayon triumphantly. Victory. Sunwoo laughed. Madame Kang glanced toward the door. I'll arrange breakfast. Duri's fist shot into the air. Pancakes. Sunwoo shook his head slowly. You celebrate very fast. Duri smiled. We already won. Madame Kang paused near the doorway. She looked back at the room one final time. Her son, her daughter-in-law, her grandchildren. The future of the Kang family wrapped in a hospital blanket. Yes, she said quietly. I suppose we did. Mrs. Park returned not long after with a tray that seemed far too generous for a hospital room. Pancakes for Duri, tea for Madame Kang, coffee for Sunwoo. Something light for Yejide, per the doctor's standing instructions. Duri received her plate with the dignity of someone who had earned it. I told you pancakes would solve everything, she said between bites. Sunwoo raised an eyebrow. That's a very broad claim. Duri shrugged without breaking stride. It's working, isn't it? Yejide laughed softly. The room felt warm now. A different kind of warm than it had been before this night started. Not the careful warmth of people trying not to argue, the real warmth of people who had been through something difficult together and were still in the same room on the other side of it. Madame Kang sat near the window with her tea, watching the family. She did this quietly, without announcing it, the way she had watched most things in her life. But what she was watching now was different from the careful surveillance of the last few hours. This was something else. Sunwoo helping Duri with her breakfast. Yejide adjusting the blanket around the baby. The easy, natural rhythm of people who trusted one another. Mrs. Park appeared quietly beside her. "You're thinking again, madam." "Yes." "And what conclusion have you reached?" Madame Kang looked toward the bed. "That perhaps I spent too many years preparing for enemies." She paused. "And not enough years appreciating family." Mrs. Park said nothing. She didn't need to. Across the room, Sunwoo had finished helping Duri. He walked over to the bed and sat close beside Yejide. "How are you feeling?" "Tired." "That's expected." "But happy." Sunwoo smiled at that. Something in his face softened in a way it rarely did in the world outside this room. "I'm glad." Yejide looked down at the sleeping baby. "He hasn't cried much." "Maybe he inherited your patience." Yejide glanced at him. "Or maybe he's just waiting to meet his sister properly." Duri's head snapped up from across the room. "I heard that." Sunwoo smiled. "I know." Duri slid off the couch and crossed the room to stand beside the bed. She looked at the baby with enormous seriousness. "Hi," she said quietly. "I'm Duri." "I'm your sister." She paused. "I'll teach you everything." The baby stirred very slightly. Duri turned to the room with an expression of complete triumph. "He knows." Sunwoo looked at Yejide. "She gets that certainty from you." Yejide smiled. "I hope she keeps it." The hours before Madame Kang's arrival had been quiet ones, the kind of quiet that hospitals always have after midnight, when the building is trying to pretend that nothing urgent is happening on any of its floors. Yejide had been awake for most of it. Not because of pain. The doctors had managed that. But because she kept thinking about the dinner. Not the words Madame Kang had said. She had already worked through those. What she kept returning to was the moment before. The way the room had felt when she walked in that evening. 20 people at a long table, silver cutlery, flowers she didn't recognize, and the particular kind of silence that fills a room when everyone already knows what's about to happen except for the person standing in the doorway. She had felt it immediately, the way you feel a current in water before you step in. But she had walked forward anyway. Because Sunwoo was already at the table, because Duri was already seated, because the family she had chosen was already inside that room, and Yejide had made a decision a long time ago that she was not the kind of woman who turned around in doorways. She had stayed, through the dinner, through the words, through the moment when Madame Kang had looked at her children and said what she said. She had stayed, and now she was here, holding a sleeping boy who didn't know yet what family he had been born into, what history he was carrying. What wars had already been fought on his behalf before he had ever opened his eyes. She looked down at his face. He looked like Sunwoo, around the eyes. That particular calmness that he had when he wasn't performing strength for anyone. She hoped the baby kept that, the real version. "You picked a complicated family," she told him softly. The baby didn't respond. Yejide smiled. "But so did I." Madame Kang remained by the window for a long moment. The rain outside had slowed now, leaving the street glossy beneath the hospital lights. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights stretching across the pavement like long streaks of white. Sunwoo noticed his mother hadn't moved. He walked toward her. "You're thinking about something," he said quietly. Madame Kang didn't turn. "I'm thinking about patterns." Sunwoo frowned slightly. Patterns?" "Yes." She finally faced him. "The Shin family never wastes a visit." Sunwoo leaned against the window frame. You think that was just a distraction? I know it was. Across the room, Yejide looked up. Distraction for what? Madam Kang glanced toward the hallway. For someone else. The words made the room colder. Duri stopped coloring again. Are bad people coming here? Sunwoo walked over and crouched beside her. No one is coming near you, he said gently. Not while I'm here. The little girl studied his face carefully. You promise? Sunwoo nodded. I promise. Yejide watched the exchange quietly. Then she looked at Madam Kang. You're worried. Madam Kang didn't deny it. I'm alert. Same thing, Yejide replied. For a brief moment, the two women shared a look that carried a new kind of understanding. Then Sunwoo's phone buzzed again. He checked the screen. This time, his expression hardened. What is it? Yejide asked. Sunwoo lifted his eyes. Security just reported something strange. Madam Kang's voice lowered. Go on. The nurse assigned to this floor tonight. He paused. Never checked in. Yejide's heartbeat skipped. What do you mean never checked in? The hospital says she called in sick. Madam Kang's eyes sharpened instantly. Then who was walking the hallway earlier? No one answered. Because suddenly everyone remembered. The footsteps. The nurse who had passed the room 20 minutes ago. The quiet knock on the door that never came. Duri looked confused. Why are you all looking like that? Sunwoo stood quickly. Stay here. He moved toward the door. Madam Kang followed. Sunwoo. He stopped. Lock the door, she said. Sunwoo nodded. Yejide watched as he slid the lock quietly into place. Is this really necessary? She asked. Madam Kang looked at her. Yes. Sunwoo opened the door slightly and stepped into the hallway. The corridor lights buzzed faintly. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Madam Kang stood just behind him. Do you see anyone? No. He walked a few steps down the hall, then stopped. At the far end of the corridor, a cart stood beside the wall. A nurse's cart. Left unattended. Sunwoo's eyes narrowed. That wasn't there earlier. Madam Kang said quietly, Don't touch it. Sunwoo crouched slowly and looked closer. A hospital badge lay on the tray. He picked it up. The name printed on it made his jaw tighten. What is it? Madam Kang asked. Sunwoo held up the badge. The name read, Shin Medical Consultant, Visitor Authorization. Madam Kang's voice dropped. They were already inside. At that exact moment, inside the hospital room, Duri looked toward the door. Mom? Yejide lifted her head. What is it? I heard something. Yejide listened carefully. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a faint sound. The soft click of the door handle. Someone outside was trying it. Slowly, testing the lock. Yejide's entire body went still. She tightened her hold on the baby. Duri, she whispered. Come here. The little girl quickly climbed onto the bed beside her. Outside in the hallway, Sunwoo heard it too. The door handle, turning. His voice dropped to a deadly calm. Mother. Madam Kang nodded once. Yes. Sunwoo stepped forward. Then he spoke loudly enough for the person outside the door to hear. You picked the wrong room. The handle stopped moving. The hallway fell silent. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, footsteps. Soft. Moving away. Madam Kang exhaled slowly. They're leaving. Sunwoo shook his head. No. He listened carefully. They're repositioning. Inside the room, Yejide held the baby tightly against her chest. Duri pressed close beside her, her small hand gripping the blanket. Mom, Duri whispered, are we playing a hiding game? Yejide forced a calm smile. Something like that. Outside the door, Sunwoo walked quietly down the hallway. The nurse's cart still stood where he had seen it earlier. But now the far exit door was slowly closing. Someone had just slipped through it. Sunwoo reached the door and pushed it open. The stairwell beyond was empty. Rain echoed faintly from outside vents. Madam Kang joined him. "They're gone." Sunwoo studied the stairwell. "No." He pointed down toward the first landing. A black umbrella leaned against the wall. Shinji's umbrella. Madam Kang's eyes narrowed. "She left that on purpose." "Why?" "To remind us she was here." Sunwoo picked up the umbrella slowly. Water dripped from its edge. "Or," he said quietly, "to remind us she could have gone further." They returned to the hospital room. The moment Yejide saw Sunwoo enter, she knew the danger had passed, at least for now. "Is it over?" she asked. Sunwoo closed the sa-ikwa door behind him. "For tonight." Duri tilted her head. "So the bad people left?" Sunwoo smiled gently. "Yes." "Because Dad scared them?" Sunwoo chuckled softly. "Something like that." The little girl looked very satisfied with this answer and went back to her drawing. Madam Kang stood near the window again. But this time her posture was different. Less rigid, more thoughtful. Yejide noticed. "You expected this?" Madam Kang nodded. "The Shin family tests boundaries before making real moves." "And tonight?" Yejide asked. "Tonight they learned something." Sunwoo looked at his mother. "And what exactly did they learn?" Madam Kang turned toward the family. "That the Kang family is no longer divided." The words hung in the room. For the first time, Yejide didn't feel like an outsider hearing them. Sunwoo walked back to the bed and looked down at the baby. The tiny boy shifted slightly in his sleep. "What about the Shin family now?" Yejide asked. Sunwoo's voice was calm again. "Now they disappear." Madam Kang nodded slowly. "They will retreat." "Why?" Duri asked suddenly. Everyone looked at her. The little girl lifted her crayon. "Because we're stronger?" Sunwoo laughed softly. "Yes." Madam Kang looked at the child for a moment. Then she said something quietly. "Because family is stronger than power." Duri grinned proudly and held up her drawing again. "I fixed it again." Yejide leaned forward to look. The drawing showed 5 stick figures now. Mom, Dad, Duri, the baby, and one tall figure standing behind them. Grandma. Madam Kang stared at the drawing longer than anyone expected. Then she said softly, "Why am I behind everyone?" Duri shrugged. "Because you protect us." Something in Madam Kang's expression softened in a way no one had seen before. She reached out and gently touched the baby's tiny hand. "For many years," she said quietly, "I believed protecting this family meant controlling it." Yejide watched her carefully. "But tonight," Madam Kang continued, "I learned something different." She looked at Yejide. "Family survives because people choose to stay." The room grew quiet. Yejide held her gaze. "You pushed me very hard to find that out." "Yes," Madam Kang admitted. "And you pushed back." Sunwoo sat beside the bed. "I think we're all done pushing now." The tension that had filled the hospital for hours slowly faded. Outside, the rain stopped. Morning light began to creep over the city skyline. Duri yawned loudly. "I'm tired." Yejide smiled. "Come here." The little girl climbed onto the bed carefully beside her mother and baby brother. Sunwoo wrapped an arm around them. Madam Kang stood quietly nearby, watching. After a long moment she spoke. "Yejide." Yejide looked up. Madam Kang took a breath. "I was wrong." The words were simple, but they carried more weight than any speech she had ever given. "You are family," she said, "and you always were." Yejide held her gaze for several seconds. Then she nodded. "Good." Sunwoo looked between them. "Well," he said, "that might be the first peaceful ending this family has had in years." Madam Kang smiled faintly. "Yes." She looked down at the sleeping baby once more. And it's the beginning of a new one. Sunwoo stood and walked to the window. The sun had finally broken through the clouds. He looked back at his family. The Shin family thought they were hunting us. Yejide raised an eyebrow. And? Sunwoo smiled slightly. They just reminded us why we fight. Morning light slowly filled the hospital room. The storm outside had passed. Sunwoo stood near the window, watching the first rays of sunlight stretch across the city. For the first time since the night began, the tension in his shoulders had eased. Behind him, the room had grown quiet. Duri had fallen asleep curled beside her mother, one small arm draped protectively across the blanket that held her baby brother. Yejide leaned back against the hospital pillows, exhausted but peaceful. The baby slept in her arms, his tiny fingers opening and closing as if testing the new world he had just entered. Madame Kang remained standing near the foot of the bed. She hadn't said much since her apology, but she hadn't left either. That alone meant something. Sunwoo turned from the window. "Mother." Madame Kang looked up. "Yes?" "The Shin family." Her eyes sharpened slightly. "What about them?" Sunwoo walked back toward the bed. "They won't stop after tonight." Madame Kang nodded slowly. "No. But they will hesitate." Yejide raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like experience speaking." Madame Kang gave a faint smile. "It is." She glanced down at the sleeping baby. "Families like the Shin family do not rush. They calculate." Sunwoo crossed his arms. "And tonight they calculated wrong." "Yes," Madame Kang agreed, "because they believed this family was divided." Her eyes moved toward Yejide. "They believed you were weak." Yejide gave a soft laugh. "Well, that was their first mistake." Sunwoo smiled slightly. Madame Kang looked at the baby again. "But their second mistake," she said quietly, "was thinking we would protect this child alone." Duri suddenly stirred. She blinked sleepily and looked around. "Did we win?" Sunwoo chuckled. "Yes." "We won." Duri sat up proudly. "I knew it." Then she lifted the drawing she had fallen asleep holding. The paper was crinkled now, but the picture was still clear. 5 stick figures. A small family. She pointed to each one. "That's Mom. That's Dad. That's me. That's the baby." Then she pointed to the tall figure behind them. "And that's Grandma." Madame Kang studied the drawing again. This time she didn't ask why she stood behind them. She understood now. Sunwoo looked at the picture too. "Well," he said, "I think the artist captured everything perfectly." Yejide smiled softly. "Except one thing." Duri frowned. "What?" Yejide gently reached for the crayon. Then she added something small to the corner of the drawing. A house, with all 5 stick figures standing inside it. "There," she said. "That's better." Duri grinned. "Yes." Madame Kang watched them quietly. For the first time in many years, she felt something unfamiliar. Not control, not strategy. Peace. She turned toward the door. "I should let the doctors finish their work." Sunwoo nodded. But before she left, Madame Kang stopped beside Yejide. She hesitated. Then she spoke softly. "You protected this family tonight." Yejide met her gaze. "We protected it together." Madame Kang considered that. Then she nodded once. "Yes." She left the room. The door closed quietly behind her. Sunwoo sat beside the bed again. Yejide leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Yejide asked, "So, do you think the Shin family will try again?" Sunwoo looked down at his sleeping children. "Yes. Eventually." "And when they do?" Sunwoo smiled slightly. "We'll be ready." Duri stretched and yawned loudly. "Can someone get me pancakes?" Sunwoo laughed. "Only if you promise not to start another war today." Duri thought about it. No promises. The room filled with quiet laughter. Outside, the sun rose fully over the city. And inside the hospital room, the Kang family finally felt something they had not felt in a long time. Safe. The hallway outside the hospital room was quiet again. Madame Kang walked slowly toward the elevator, the sound of her shoes echoing softly against the polished floor. She pressed the call button. For a moment she stood there alone. Then the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Mrs. Park stepped out. She had clearly been waiting nearby the entire night, quietly managing everything behind the scenes as she always did. "Madam," Mrs. Park said gently, "is everything resolved?" Madame Kang stepped inside the elevator. "For now," she replied. The doors slid closed. Mrs. Park studied her expression. "I've never seen Master Sunwoo look the way he did tonight." Madame Kang allowed herself a faint smile. "Yes. Like a father? Like a man who finally understands what he's protecting." The elevator descended slowly. Mrs. Park folded her hands. "And Madam?" Madame Kang looked ahead. "What about me?" Mrs. Park spoke carefully. "You protected the family too." Madame Kang didn't answer immediately. Instead, she remembered the drawing Duri had shown her. The tall figure standing behind the others, watching over them. Finally, she said quietly, "I spent many years protecting the Kang name." The elevator reached the lobby, the doors opened. Madame Kang stepped out. "But tonight," she added, "I protected something much more important." Outside the hospital, the rain had stopped completely. The street was empty. The black car from earlier was long gone. Sunlight began reflecting off the wet pavement. Mrs. Park glanced around. "The Shin family won't disappear quietly." Madame Kang nodded. "No. But they won't move again anytime soon." "Why?" Madame Kang's voice became calm and certain. "Because they saw something tonight." Mrs. Park waited. "What did they see?" Madame Kang looked back up at the hospital building. "They saw that this family is no longer divided." Upstairs, Sunwoo was sitting beside Yejide's bed. Duri was now fully awake and telling her baby brother a very serious story about how she had defeated the bad umbrella lady. "And then Dad scared her away," Duri said proudly. Sunwoo leaned back in the chair. "That's not exactly how it happened." Duri crossed her arms. "It is in my version." Yejide laughed softly. "I think her version is better." The baby stirred slightly in his blanket. Sunwoo reached over and gently adjusted the fabric. His expression softened. Yejide watched him. "You're thinking again." Sunwoo smiled faintly. "I do that sometimes." "No," Yejide said. "You do that when something is bothering you." Sunwoo leaned closer. "I was just thinking about what my mother said." "Which part?" "That the Shin family believed we were divided." Yejide nodded slowly. "And now?" Sunwoo looked at her. "Now they know better." Duri suddenly raised her crayon again. "Look." She held up the drawing proudly. "Now there's 6. Everyone looked. Sunwoo frowned slightly. 6? Duri pointed to the new stick figure. "That's Grandma's helper." "Mrs. Park." Yejide laughed. "I think she deserves a place in the picture too." Sunwoo nodded. "She's been part of this family longer than any of us." The baby made a small sound in his sleep. Duri leaned closer. "He likes my drawing." Yejide kissed the top of her daughter's head. "I think he does." The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence was peaceful, not tense. Sunwoo looked at his family, his wife, his daughter, his newborn son, everything he had fought to protect, everything that mattered. Yejide reached for his hand. "So what happens now?" Sunwoo squeezed her fingers gently. "Now we go home." Duri grinned. "Finally." Sunwoo stood and walked back to the window one last time. The sun had fully risen now. The city looked calm again, as if nothing dramatic had happened during the night. But Sunwoo knew better. Some nights changed everything. He turned back toward the bed. Our family just survived its first real test. Yejide smiled. And? Sunwoo shrugged slightly. I think we passed. Duri raised her fist proudly. Of course we did. Sunwoo laughed, softly. Yes, of course they did. The morning passed slowly. Doctors came and went, checking on Yejide and the baby. Nurses adjusted monitors and spoke in quiet voices, careful not to disturb the peaceful atmosphere that had finally settled in the room. Sunwoo stayed close to the bed the entire time, not because anyone asked him to, but because he wanted to. Duri sat cross-legged on the couch, now working very seriously on what she called the final version of her drawing. Every few minutes she would glance up to make sure everyone was still exactly where she had placed them on the page. Yejide noticed. You're making sure the picture stays accurate? Duri nodded. Family pictures have to be correct. Sunwoo laughed quietly. That's very responsible of you. Madame Kang returned to the room shortly after sunrise. When she entered, she stopped for a moment near the door. The sight before her was unfamiliar. Sunwoo sitting beside the bed. Yejide holding the baby. Duri coloring quietly. It looked normal. Something the Kang family had rarely experienced. Sunwoo looked up when he saw his mother. You didn't go home? Madame Kang shook her head. No. Why not? She walked further into the room. Because I wanted to see something. Yejide raised an eyebrow. What? Madame Kang gestured toward the baby. The future of this family. Duri held up her drawing again. Well, he's already in the picture. Madame Kang smiled slightly. Yes, I see that. Yejide studied her carefully. You're very calm this morning. Madame Kang folded her hands. Storms always pass. Sunwoo tilted his head. That sounds optimistic. It's not optimism, she replied. It's experience. Sunwoo leaned back in his chair. The Shin family won't disappear forever. No, Madame Kang agreed, but they will think very carefully before moving again. Yejide shifted slightly in the bed. And if they don't? Sunwoo answered calmly. Then they'll discover something. Duri looked up immediately. What? Sunwoo smiled. That they picked the wrong family. Duri grinned. I like that answer. She hopped off the couch and handed her drawing to Madame Kang. Okay. This is the final one. Madame Kang studied it carefully. 6 figures now stood together in front of the little house. Mom, Dad, Duri, Baby June, Grandma, and Mrs. Park. Everyone together. Madame Kang traced the lines gently with her finger. For such a simple drawing, she said quietly, this picture says a lot. Duri nodded proudly. That's because it's true. Sunwoo looked at Yejide. She gets that honesty from you. Yejide smiled. I hope she keeps it. The baby stirred again, stretching his tiny fingers. Madame Kang reached down carefully. He grabbed her finger instantly. The room went quiet again. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Madame Kang said softly, I spent many years believing strength meant control. She looked at Yejide. But your daughter has a different definition. Duri raised her hand proudly. Family means you stay. Madame Kang nodded. Yes. That's exactly what it means. Sunwoo stood and walked over to the bed. He looked at his son. Looks like he picked a good family to join. Yejide leaned her head against his shoulder. I think so. Duri yawned loudly. I'm still voting for pancakes. Everyone laughed. Sunwoo nodded. Fair request. Madame Kang glanced toward the door. I'll arrange breakfast. Duri pumped her fist triumphantly. Victory! Sunwoo shook his head. You celebrate quickly. Duri smiled. We already won. Sunwoo looked around the room. His wife? His children? His mother. The people who mattered most. Yes, he said quietly. I think we did. Outside, the city was fully awake now. Cars moved through the streets. Morning sunlight reflected off the glass buildings. Life continued. But inside that hospital room, something important had changed. The Kang family was no longer divided. They were stronger. Together, the sun arrived slowly over Seoul. First as a thin line of pale gold along the edge of the buildings, then as something warmer, something that spread across the glass of the hospital windows and turned the room from blue-gray to amber. Madame Kang stood at the window and watched it come. She had watched many sunrises. Most of them she couldn't remember. This one, she would. Behind her, the room breathed quietly. Sunwoo had finally fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed, his head tilted back at an angle that would make his neck ache when he woke. Yejide was sleeping too. The baby rested against her chest. Duri was still on the couch, but her eyes were open, watching Madame Kang. Madame Kang turned from the window. You're awake. I've been awake. Since when? Duri considered the question. The whole time. Madame Kang walked quietly toward the couch and sat down beside her. Duri looked at her. Are you sad? No. You look like you're thinking about something sad. Madame Kang looked at the drawing still in Duri's hands. I'm thinking about time. Duri tilted her head. What about it? About how long it takes, Madame Kang said slowly, to learn the right things. Duri seemed to consider this very carefully. My teacher says you can learn fast if you pay attention. Madame Kang looked at her. Something in her expression was open in a way it rarely was. Your teacher is right. Duri smiled. I know. I tell her that all the time. Madame Kang almost laughed. You must be very popular in class. I'm the most popular, Duri said without hesitation. This time Madame Kang did laugh. Softly, in a way she hadn't heard herself laugh in a long time. Duri grinned. Then she held out the drawing. You can keep this one. Madame Kang looked at it. 6 stick figures. 1 small house. A door that didn't quite fit its frame. Smoke coming from a chimney that was drawn too big. Everything slightly imperfect. And completely clear. Are you sure? Madame Kang asked. Yes. Why? Duri shrugged in the simple way of children who don't make complicated things complicated. So you can look at it when you forget. Forget what? Duri pointed to the drawing, that you're in the picture. Madame Kang held the drawing carefully. She looked at the figure Duri had placed behind the others. Taller, watching over them. She had always believed that, to protect something, you had to stand apart from it. Keep your distance. Control the space between yourself and the things you cared about, so that nothing could reach them, so that nothing could reach you either. She had spent years perfecting that distance, and in the end, a 7-year-old with a purple crayon had undone it completely. Thank you, Madame Kang said. Duri nodded. You're welcome. Then she curled back up on the couch and went to sleep. The room was quiet again. Madame Kang sat for a moment with the drawing in her hands. Then she stood and walked back to the window. Outside, Seoul was fully awake. Life moving through the streets. People going about their mornings without any awareness of what had happened in this hospital through the long hours of the previous night. The storm that had come and gone. The family that had been tested. The verdict they had reached together. Madame Kang looked at the drawing one more time. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. She turned back to the room. Her son, asleep in an uncomfortable chair. Her daughter-in-law, sleeping with her children. Her granddaughter, who had drawn her into the picture before she had earned it. The Kang family, all of them, present, together, refusing to leave. Madame Kang had spent her entire life believing that strength was something you performed, a posture, a voice, a room you walked into the right way. But standing at this window watching the city wake up, she understood something different. Strength was not what you showed to enemies. It was what you chose to give to the people inside your walls. It was showing up at a dinner and staying through the words. It was standing in the rain without an umbrella because your family needed to see you there. It was drawing a picture of 6 people in front of a small house and placing the one you love the most behind the others, not behind them as a punishment, behind them as a shield. If this story reminded you how powerful family can be, like the video, drop your favorite moment in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Because sometimes the greatest victories are the ones that bring a family closer than ever before.